You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. We're taping this show from our studio in Permata Sapura, the latest skyscraper, iconic building at the KLCC Business District. The conversation that I'm going to have today is, of course, with Tom Wright, one of the co-founders at Project Brazen, a content creation studio that focuses on very interesting stories, all of which are true. Their motto is, of course, stranger than fiction, and it is very strange. But before we jump into Tom and the kind of things that he's currently doing, there's also something I want to touch upon, which is the House of Cards creator, Beau Willimon, is confirmed to be developing a series on Malaysia's 1MDB corruption scandal. This news has been broken by The Hollywood Reporter, and Willimon and his Westward producing partner Jordan Tappis have teamed up with SK Global to produce the show, and of course it is expected to be hitting on our small screens, perhaps even streaming on all our streaming sites very soon, perhaps even as early as next year. Because of this, there is also that whole element of how the story of 1MDB continues to be told and retold in all the other platforms around the world. And we have to keep this one alive because the 1MDB corruption scandal is still currently happening. In fact, the decision on the former Premier Datuk Seri Najib Tun Razak is going to be done on December 8th. So there's a lot of ongoings there. But again, we would have the pleasure to get Tom on the show again. Tom, how are you? Let's talk a little bit more about the news that has come from Project Hollywood and the kind of items that is coming in between, or the relationship between SK Global and Beau Willimon. How has it been in terms of this TV series? Are you excited about it?
Yeah, we're really excited that Beau Willimon has come on, and his production company have come on to create a TV show based on our book $1 Billion Whale. And the writer David Henry Huang, who's a Tony Award-winning playwright, is going to be the writer of the show. We think they're a fantastic team. It's SK Global that bought the rights to the book that are honchoing this, and we think it's a fantastic team because obviously House of Cards was a very successful show, and these are very sort of intellectual playwrights and writers, so they're going to do this in a really sophisticated way.
Was it hard to negotiate this TV deal?
Well, to be frank, I'm not the one that negotiated the deal. We sold the rights to $1 Billion Whale to SK Global a couple of years ago when the book came out, and they've been doing that. So we haven't been involved in the day-to-day. But these things take a while because, to get a really great writer, you need to find time in their schedule so that they can, they can make time to do these projects. It takes a long time. And so that's one thing that was going on. And that's why it's taken a little while to get this package together. But this is full steam ahead now. So we're very excited.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the current projects that you guys are doing. One of which is, of course, Fat Leonard, and the Fat Leonard Podcast is one hell of a podcast, I would say so myself. We've just dropped episode 9, and this is indeed pushing podcasting production to another level. In fact, this would be heralding a new era for podcasts, at least in this part of the world. And we would like to know how Project Brazen approached this storytelling as well.
Well, Project Brazen is the storytelling company I set up with Bradley Hope, with whom I wrote $1 Billion Whale. One thing that a bunch of people have been saying to me about Fat Leonard is, look, I don't listen to podcasts, and I really enjoyed this. And I think that's one of the best things I've heard because the podcast genre has been around for a while, and it's popular with certain people, but it's starting to sort of branch out and find listenerships in other places, especially like in places like Malaysia, where people may not have listened as much to podcasts until now, and in Asia in general. There's a huge upside for us getting our stories out by podcasts in Asia because the listenership hasn't been that large here, and it's growing in a big way. One reason, podcasts are much more intimate in a way than a book or a magazine article or a newspaper story, because you hear the voice of the presenter, in this case me, and you hear Leonard's voice. Leonard is a fraudster from Penang who carried out a multi-year fraud inside the US Navy, building a mafia inside the US Navy. And, he's admitting it all on tape. So it's this fascinating ride where, you think you know him, he's telling a story, we find out things about him along the way, about his misogyny, about his treatment of a Filipino woman with whom he had children, all these kinds of twists and turns, all the way up till episode 9, which dropped just yesterday. And so, podcasts, we just see that as the future. It's a great way to test out stories with audiences and to build audiences for future TV and film adaptations.
Matching the two items, do you feel that the story of 1MDB can be turned into a podcast product, or do you think that whatever that has happened in terms of the $1 Billion Whale book and the selling of the rights to SK Global, that's basically done and you're on to other projects right now?
Well, we're not doing 1MDB as a podcast because we already wrote a book, and so the book is the sort of basis from which to do the TV series, which is the fictionalized version of the Jolo story, the 1MDB and $1 Billion Whale story. So, we don't foresee doing a podcast in this case, although we could do one. I mean, we're not going to rule that out. I mean, there's still a lot of great audio out there of Jolo partying and people who've never talked still, but didn't talk for the book, who are now willing to talk, who we could get, and we could do an audio version of it if there were demand for that. And that's something we could get to listeners via radio or via podcasts. But no, what we're doing at Project Brazen is we're looking at news stories now, not looking backwards. We're doing news stories. We've got a great story about corruption inside a royal family. We've got a great story about concerts gone wrong, sort of around the globe. Many things on our roster for podcasts, and we're still doing articles as well, because we think that's also, for some stories it works better that way.
Now that we've had 9 episodes out, the last time we spoke, we just heard the first 2 episodes. How has the reception been, particularly amongst the listeners out there? Have you been getting a lot of listenership? And what would be some of the composition of the listenership? Are they mostly here in this part of the world, or mostly in the US? What's the composition like?
Yeah, we've got very healthy downloads. We're very excited. Also on social media, people are really into this story. One of the comments we're getting, which I really like, is that this podcast picks up pace. One of the problems with podcasts is sometimes they start out strong but they're a bit too long and there's padding in the middle. But in this case, I really feel like we keep adding revelations through the 9 episodes. Each episode's half an hour long, not too long. It's just perfect for a commute or for maybe for a 5K run, something like that. And so that's why we do it like that. We're getting great feedback from critics, and also just in terms of the numbers. And I think what we're seeing from yesterday's episode is that the audience is just growing for this story. It's not, people don't quite realize the extent of it. I mean, this is one of the worst national security failures in U.S. military history, and it's also just an amazing story. And of course, Leonard has yet to be sentenced, and so we can all, when you finish listening to the 9 episodes, you can follow along in real time as he goes to court. He will be the star witness in the trials of other Navy officers in February, and then he himself will be sentenced. So just like Jolo, who's from Penang, Leonard Glenn Francis is also from Penang. It's another Malaysian on a global stage.
Yeah. I mean, not that it matters, but do you know what's the reaction from Fat Leonard himself following this podcast? Do you think that he's listening to it at least?
I don't know if Leonard is listening to it, because I stopped talking to him in late August when I challenged him about the treatment of his former girlfriend, this woman Morena from the Philippines, and what happened to his children. I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't listened, but you'll see how my relationship with him breaks down in that episode, and also in the episode that dropped yesterday. He didn't want the podcast to come out after months of talking bravely, saying, I don't care what the judge does in my case. He sort of didn't really want the podcast to come out. But this is after 25 hours of recording audio with me, where he never made that clear. And so, I haven't talked to him since then, so I don't know whether he's listening or watching.
When Fat Leonard podcast first started out, at least in the first 2 episodes, you were very clear on to the listener, to the folks, the audience, to try to be more discerning, to try to understand that while Fat Leonard speaks one thing, we have to look at the evidence to point to another. This whole notion of double speak, so to speak, right? And in a society where people always say what they mean, it is sometimes quite troubling to understand what a person says versus what a person does. Do you feel that this kind of work that you guys do at Project Brazen, through the Fatlanet Podcast, or even before that with the $1 Billion Whale, the public must actually look at things with a little bit more scrutiny, as in more discerning in terms of the kind of things that have been said, and then benchmark that with the kind of things that people do. Do you think that that's going to change in terms of how people understand people of power behave and say and does whatever they do?
Well, everything we do at Project Brazen is based on facts. Everything is true. We're telling truth stories, and Bradley and I have a reputation for doing that. $1 billion whale and 25 years at the Wall Street Journal, many stories. Nothing that Fat Leonard says in the podcast, we did not use anything that he said in the podcast that we could not check from a second source, and that's one of our standards about journalism. And so, nothing in there is just Leonard making claims. It's all checked out. So, for example, he talks about how he moved his servers onto a Chinese server, and that led him to potentially be hackable by the Chinese government. And don't forget, Leonard has all kinds of photos, sexual compromat photos and videos of U.S. Navy officers. And I had two other sources who told me that China actually did get hold of that sexual compromat, which is one of the worst national security failures of the U.S. Navy's history. But we are not relying on Leonard's word for it. There's something we didn't put in the podcast till very late. Leonard was claiming that when he lost his contracts in Asia, when he was arrested, he was replaced by a U.S. Navy contractor who was also corrupt. And Leonard said, of course, that contractor's corrupt. Now, I couldn't find any evidence that contractor was corrupt, so I didn't put it in the podcast earlier on. And then, as we were going to air, the U.S. Department of Justice issued an arrest warrant for the CEO of the contractor who replaced Leonard, showing how deep this problem of corruption is in the U.S. Navy. And so we then included it at that point. So rest assured, everything in this podcast is true.
Right. Speaking of which, what other things did you have to leave out? Do you feel that, you left out more than you kept in?
Well, I can't talk in specifics about it, because if we left it out, I'm not going to want to mention it. But yeah. I can talk about it in generalities. Yeah, there were claims of admirals sleeping with prostitutes that we didn't put in because we couldn't confirm it, and things like that. So that's the gold standard for investigative journalism. You just have to be sure of what you're doing and be very fair and give people fair rights to response and all those kinds of things.
All right. We'll go for one short break before we continue on with Tom Wright of Project Brazen. Welcome back. This is Notepad. I have on the line with me one of the co-founders of Project Brazen, Tom Wright. He is, of course, a former Wall Street Journal reporter, famed for writing the 1MDB book called $1 Billion Whale. He is, of course, on the show talking about the latest product that Project Brazen is producing, which is called Fat Leonard Podcast. Tom, much of the things that you portray in this podcast, in order for us to move ahead and move better, it requires a lot of change, reforms, even not just in the US and how they deal with the military or the Navy in particular, but generally speaking, right? Because 1MDB also requires greater attention towards how things should be made better. Governmental reform, greater enactment of law enforcement, better transparency. Do you feel that what you do is actually moving the needle in terms of getting better governance, getting better solution for the people? Or do you feel that it's mostly at our level, basically, getting the public to know what is happening, and that's about that? There's nothing else to it.
Well, I mean, some days I'm cynical. I look at Malaysia and I think, well, if Najib Razak comes back to power, that's going to be an extraordinary thing, because, in our book and in the courts of law in Malaysia, he was proven to be a criminal, and he's a convicted criminal, given 12 years in jail, and he appears to be coming back in Malaysia. And so that's enough to make you quite cynical about the processes and the impact of journalism. But at the same time, if you didn't have any journalism at all and nobody was writing about these things, like The Edge in Malaysia that did such a great job on the 1MDB scandal, then you're going to be in an even worse place. And so I think it's great that people still get into journalism and that journalism continues to thrive in many parts of the world, even under difficult circumstances.
Some might accuse Project Brazen and some of the work that you guys do as sensationalism. I do not subscribe to that view, however, but I do feel that when a person does something, when a journalist reports on something, what's the point of this journalist doing it if no one is listening to it, no one is reading it, no one is watching it? What's your response to these kind of criticisms that is leveled against you? And perhaps maybe you can share a little bit about your insight into the future of journalism. What do you think it's going to be shaping up in the future?
Well, I think loads of journalists around the world are doing unbelievable work at the moment. And, look at the Wirecard coverage in the Financial Times, for example. And, just yesterday, the New York Times has a great series about the Democratic Republic of Congo and how important cobalt is becoming in this sort of race to get cobalt and other minerals between China and the US. I don't think you need to sensationalize the truth, because what we're learning through this golden age for journalism and narrative nonfiction is that the truth is stranger than fiction, to use the cliche that we use that cliche on our website in a tongue-in-cheek way on Project Brazen's website, because it's just incredible when you tell these stories to people. If you tell the story of Jolo, nobody believes it. People who haven't heard it think you're embellishing, and that's very similar with the Fat Leonard story or any other number of stories that you could dig into and tell these days. I think it's probably always been like that, the world. It's just we're in a golden age of storytelling, and the demand for content from all the streaming platforms is also huge.
Okay, Tom. One more short break before we conclude our conversation with Tom Wright of Project Brazen. Thanks for staying on. This is Notepad. I have with me Tom Wright on the line. Tom, let's move away from the kind of podcast and all the other stuff that you guys are doing. Let's talk about the distribution platform, about growing your business per se. Now that 9 episodes have been dropped, there's a lot of conversations into how radio stations, podcast publishers, platform owners are looking at your product. Do you feel that there is an opportunity for them to now buy your product, or at least syndicate the product to these kind of platforms in order for you to grow your distribution channels and make your work seen and heard by other people around the globe?
Yeah, so we're very excited because, we've built our own distribution platform with PRX, which, our distribution partner, to get podcasts out there around the world. And then, we can sell those and develop them ourselves and with our partners into TV shows and films. And we're sort of platform agnostic, so our stuff can go anywhere. One thing I'm very excited to do is to get this story to more Malaysians, and so perhaps Astro could take it and put it onto its radio, that kind of thing, and that would really build a huge audience for it, and get it out to more Malaysians, for example. And we're trying the same thing in other places like Indonesia and the Philippines. We really want our stories to get heard because we think they're impactful, especially this one because it's so Malaysia focused. It would work very well in Malaysia. So that's another thing we're trying. And we think the sky's the limit for this, just because people are really craving these true stories these days. People don't want to read. People in general just don't want fiction. They want real things.
Knowing that you want to get more people to listen to this or to learn about this, do you feel that it's an opportunity now for you to publish this in other languages, in Bahasa Malaysia or Bahasa Indonesia, for instance, or any other languages that you feel is necessary to penetrate that particular market?
Yeah, to be honest, our market focus is not Malaysia. So that's not something that we're really focusing on, but we'd love to get it to more Malaysians. And if we can reach a deal to get it translated into Bahasa Malaysia or, in any other country into their languages. Billion Dollar Whale has been released in Bahasa Malaysia. It's been released in Thai. We just have a Thai edition just came out. It's in Japanese. So those things are important, and building those markets are important. But what we really want to do with the TV and film that we're working on is to create those shows like, Squid Games, like Money Heist, that are in one language, but they really transcend the language, and with subtitles and dubbing now, they can work all over the world. And that's really the holy grail for the business we're in, because if you can get something that works in multiple markets, then that's really the best thing you can do.
Right, I know that you've touched a bit on the kind of work that you guys are doing, but maybe you can recap with us some of the key items that you guys are doing in the future that perhaps the audience currently watching our conversation can actually keep an eye out for.
Well, like I said, we've got a show about corruption inside a royal family. Bradley's working on a fantastic book about some Korean Americans who, with the help of the CIA, tried to bring down the North Korean government, and then it all goes wrong. We've got an entertainment series hosted by a guy who took the Rolling Stones to Cuba about how some entertainment, some big concerts went wrong around the world over the years. Many, many things. Too many to mention, but we're very excited.
Right, Tom. Any final thoughts before we conclude our conversation?
Final thoughts? Please go and listen to the Fat Leonard podcast. You won't be disappointed.
All right, Tom. I just want to say this, and I don't know whether this is going to inflate your ego or anything, but I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot. I mean, for my commute, when I run, all that, right? And I can safely say that Project Brazen's latest podcast called Fat Leonard is the best podcast that I've ever listened to date. So congratulations on that. Job well done. It's well produced, well paced. The story is very riveting, and it's important for us to learn about some of the shenanigans that the public is the public must know when it comes to public officials doing stuff. It's really, really good. I just want to let you know on that.
Thank you, Ibrahim. That's a very nice comment.
Thank you very much. Okay, Tom, again, thanks very much for taking the time to speak with us. That was Tom Wright, the co-founder of Project Brazen. He's also famed for being one of the two co-authors of Billion Dollar Whale. Again, Tom Wright, thank you very much for joining us. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to Astro, AWANI.com, look for Notepad. You can also look for Project Brazen or Fat Leonard Podcast. Until then, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.